Are you a scholar, journalist, or writer focused on Palestine? Contribute to the foremost journal on the past, present, and future of Jerusalem. The Jerusalem Quarterly is soliciting articles for peer review, essays, and letters from Jerusalem. Send your work to jq@palestine-studies.org or see palestine-studies.org/journals for more info.
Welcome to Jerusalem Unplugged, the only podcast dedicated to Jerusalem, its history, and its people. Your host, Roberto Mazza, will bring you guests discussing their relationship with the Holy City. A journey through history, society, feelings, and hopes for the future. Follow the podcast on all social media platforms at Jerusalem Unplugged.
Welcome to Jerusalem Unplugged, the podcast dedicated to Jerusalem, its history, and its people. I'm your host, Roberto Mazza, and today it's with great pleasure that my guest is Kate Rouhana. Kate is the founding director of Jerusalem Story. Better say jerusalemstory.com. This is a new website that aims at offering and tell the story of Jerusalem through the less known lens of the Palestinian community of the city. Now, we're going to talk about what's in the websites, the various categories that you can find. But let me say that I found amazing the fact that you can move from the stories of Jerusalem, but you can also find information about who's who in Jerusalem today and in history. You can find good definition about the lexicon, the key words in order to understand Jerusalem. And facts. Yes, we also need to talk about facts. Because whenever we talk about Jerusalem, facts can take a different kind of dimension depending who's talking about them. But before we talk about the website, first of all, Kate, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm glad to be here.
So I want to ask you something as a first question, since you are the founding director of Jerusalem Stories. If you can tell us something about your background, and why did you decide to start Jerusalem Story?
Sure. So I'm actually an American. I'm born in the States of Irish and American origin. I was born and raised in New York City, and I became interested in the Middle East in high school by complete random chance. I became very interested and started to travel there and do work on it, and I went on to do a BA in International Relations and a Master's in Middle Eastern Studies. So in that context, I also studied the languages. And then I got involved in some other research projects. At the end of the day, I ended up marrying a Palestinian who's a citizen of Israel. And over the many years that we've been married, for whatever various reasons, we have lived at different times in Jerusalem. So I've lived and worked in Jerusalem. I was a journalist and a researcher, and this exposed me to the realities of the city from a Palestinian perspective, because of course my husband being Palestinian, we were working in Palestinian circles. I was doing, research and journalism on that angle of things. And it kind of got me really, really very interested in the city, because I think it's an exceptional city. It's exceptional in the sense that it has dynamics and realities that are really, its history is unique, obviously, but also its current realities are very, very exceptional in ways that I will describe, I'm sure, shortly. So that's basically it. I felt that there are critically important stories to be told that are not getting enough attention in the larger world. And so I came up with the idea for this project.
So let me start with a statement, the one that I just mentioned earlier. Jerusalem Story aims to tell the story of a unique city through a new lens, that of the city's large and diverse indigenous Palestinian community. So let's start from this, that you can find really in the opening page of jerusalemstory.com. What is Jerusalem Story then?
So Jerusalem Story is a project that was launched officially in June of this year by the Arab Center for Research and Policy Studies in Doha. And that aims to do exactly what you've said. It's to reveal the realities of Jerusalem, the lived experiences of a community that is close to half the city. That's the Palestinian community. Do you know that there are nearly 400,000 Palestinians living in Jerusalem? This actually is an undercount of the number, but that they're close to half of the city today. And beyond that, of course, there are many more Palestinians who live in areas outside the boundaries of the city, which Palestinians still consider to be part of Jerusalem. And of course, there are tens, if not hundreds of thousands of Palestinian Jerusalemites in exile who are banned from returning by Israel. So this project aims to tell all of their stories, past and present, to understand the history of this community in the city and what is their current lived reality under Israeli sovereignty in this city, Jerusalem, which is a World Heritage Site, but its current realities are very much different from what you might imagine.
Let me ask something personal. You mentioned that you lived in Jerusalem. So I was wondering, to what extent your experience of Jerusalem is part of Jerusalem Story, the website?
Well, obviously it does influence my perspective and the kinds of stories that I know, where I know the stories are there because of my lived experience, where somebody else coming who hadn't lived in the city might not know to look for them even, or might not know to go shine a spotlight on them, or to even explore and try to uncover them, right? So I think that the fact that I've had firsthand experience living there, yes, it does influence in a positive way, and I would say in a constructive and good way, my ability to direct this project and to understand where are the places that we need to go and explore in order to tell the whole story that we're trying to pursue and tell.
I'm curious about the structure of the website, which is, I must say, for the listeners that are not familiar with the website itself, that is very easy to navigate, and it's a great sort of option, in a sense that sometimes you bump into websites and then it's hard to go around. Whereas Jerusalem Story, it gives you this sense where you can just browse different kind of sections, and they are very easy to access. So I was wondering if you can tell us a little bit more about the structure of a website and how stories are brought to the readers.
Sure. So first thing we started off with, the first thing we started off with is the understanding that the Jerusalem as a terrain, as a field, as a story, it's extremely complex. I mean, it's so complex that it's even taken us, our team, we're still learning, and we're still trying, in order to be able to tell this story, it's like you have to know so many Byzantine realities. It's like a big onion you have to peel back. So that's one thing. We felt like it's very complicated, but what we wanted to do was two things that sort of maybe contradictory things. We wanted to present the big picture, the whole picture, and not just the way the news is always telling you the picture of that moment, that instant, and then it's gone, and you don't see the whole bigger picture in which that moment fits. So that's one thing we were really keen on doing. But at the same time, we wanted to make it accessible to people in a way that is simpler and easier. Due to its complexity, let's structure it simply. And I have to confess that I do have a background in instructional design, and maybe that informed a little bit how this website kind of got put together. So yeah, that's why we organized it there are sort of, we can talk about all the different types of sections, but the main thing is that we organized it by topics. And then within the topics, we have a landing page that makes it really easy to see what's sort of in every topic. And I think that maybe in some senses this is a little artificial, like the realities aren't isolated, like the separation wall and the boundaries and the this and that, they're all intermeshed. But if we can sort of deal with them maybe separately in writing and in researching about them, we can make it more accessible to people to understand each one separately, and then we can cross-link them after. So that's how the website structure was. The basic design of it was approached. Now, I would say that the website has, as I mentioned, we have these different types of sections. Much of the content is organized in themes and topics. Themes are sort of the biggest organizing, and then within that we have topics. Within each topic, we present both the foundational research to anchor that topic in a comprehensive overview, but we also, and because Jerusalem is so complex, we feel that's really necessary to have that baseline foundational research, because you can't understand the personal story in full unless you sort of have read the basic foundational research. But at the same time, if you only read the research, then you're just getting the dry data and you're not seeing the real life, the actual lived experience of what does that mean in someone's life? What does that mean in someone's day-to-day? So in our topics, we do both those things. So around the foundational research, we present more journalistic content, such as personal stories, interviews, videos, graphics, and maps. And then aside from the topics, which is the big, huge part of the website, we have some other sections. We have a blog that's called Jerusalem Notebook. And the idea here, again, is to share stories that don't necessarily fall into any clear topic, but all relate to the story of the community of Jerusalem, the past, present, and future. So there we have character profiles, book reviews, stories even about places or businesses, stories about the many different communities that make up the Palestinian community, such as Armenians, Sikhs, Africans, etc. Reports on events, some news reports, conversations, photo essays, and more. So that is our blog, Jerusalem Notebook. In addition to the topics on the blog, we have a section, as you mentioned, on the bios of Jerusalemites, or bios of Palestinian Jerusalemites, more accurately. And here we do in-depth profiles of Palestinians who have made myriad and diverse contributions to their community and its fabric, past, present, and future, and famous and obscure. And we sort of, over time, we're hoping this work is going to help to create a kind of social history, and it helps to amplify the stories that we're telling in our topics. So one really cool feature of our website is that we can, next to the text of a main story, we can put in the margin another piece to kind of like link it. And so this is a classic example where you're telling a story about a period in history, but there's a person, a bio that you can put in the margin who had a particular role in that history, and it kind of gets the reader to go, oh, I want to see more about this person, and then they take a deeper dive. So that's the bios are one of our, it's really been so interesting to do them. We try to go deeper than your normal bio, not just a CV of someone's, life achievements, but actually to look for their words and their experiences, and how did they cherish Jerusalem, and how was that reflected in whatever their life achievements were. So it's a kind of a customized bio, if you will. In addition to the bios, we have an organizational section, a section of Palestinian organizations that work on Jerusalem on the ground. And too often we find that only the Israeli organizations that do this work get all the visibility. And we wanted to create a database for really anyone wishing to explore or contribute to the work being done by the other half of the city. So we have, I think, about 85 organizations there right now. And, it's just very cool. You can search by different topics. You can search by different locations relative to their place inside the boundaries or the wall, and so on. So we hope that this will encourage people to really discover these organizations and network with them, and get involved with them in whatever way. So I'll stop there, and then I'm sure you want to talk about the lexicon next, but that's another section. But I'll stop and take a breath.
So let me ask something about the Jerusalem Notebook, because I was browsing the website and I got very curious about a particular story, but I'm also interested in how stories are developed. So for instance, there is a fascinating story about food. So the article says, in Sufism, food is a divine gift. And then this is the story of Izzeldin Bukhari. And then obviously the article delves into the question of the celebrating the heritage of the city through food. So I was wondering, how do these kind of stories come out, and then they are translated into a real story that then is published, through the website?
Right. So that's just it. We have a team on the ground. We have a team of, it's in addition to me, there is a whole team behind Jerusalem Story, right? I should definitely mention that. And some of those people are writers on the ground in the city, and they, are always on the lookout and on the hunt for good stories. And luckily for the project, they often sniff them out. So in this case, what we did was, the writer who suggested the story went and did the interview. We had a photographer go along, take some photos, and then we develop it into this kind of a story weaving the words as any other story would be developed. You weave the words of the person that you spoke with information about the work that they're doing from whatever sources, their website and so on, and there you go. You get what I'm glad to hear you found to be an enjoyable and interesting story.
It was indeed. I mean, I'm always fascinated by stories about food. I guess it's a particular fascination of mine, but I also believe that food actually explains a lot about societies and relationship between people. And so I was just drawn, I guess, as soon as I saw the title about food, I'm like, okay, I need to read the story and see who's behind the story. But it's interesting that you mentioned you have a team on the ground. So can you give us a sense of who are the people on the ground and what kind of stories they're looking for?
So they are people who are of and from this. I mean, okay, we have a team that's global, so it's not everybody's on the ground, right? We have a team of 12 people that work on this project, and some of them are located in different countries. But of the people that work in Jerusalem, they are of and from Jerusalem. They are Palestinians whose family have been centuries in the city, and they know it inside out, and they really, know every nook and cranny of it. So they and of course they know what is, and they're fully on board with the mission of the project, which is to tell the story of the Palestinian community of Jerusalem. So they just go about and try to, through word of mouth, through their networks, or sometimes there'll be some story that comes from outside and we say to them, hey, go check this out, what about this? So it goes both ways, as any other journalistic endeavor, really.
Can you tell us something about, and I'm sure you bump into some difficulties in working out the website, but also thinking about the stories that are told through the website? Any kind of difficulty, given that essentially we're talking about Jerusalem, and by experience, nothing is easy about Jerusalem.
That's true. But actually, I'm really reflecting back and thinking that we actually haven't had those kind of problems. We've had more the opposite response, that people are so excited. I mean, because we're covering a community that feels invisibilized and not heard and marginalized and in the process of being erased, people are actually usually very excited to speak with us, and they're thrilled to have this chance to tell their story. So we haven't had those kind of difficulties of people that we approach within the context and framework of this project not wanting to be part of it. That we haven't had.
Well, that's good to
hear.
For
the most part that I can recall.
It's not only good to hear, and I think you just mentioned something very important, which is about the willingness of the local people to bring about their stories, because they are essentially on the brink of annihilation and removal. So I think this is an important element to remember. Which brings me to the question of lexicon. So
wait. Before we get there, I just want to make one very critical point that I don't want to overlook, which is that in what you said, people are excited to tell their stories, but people are also afraid. So this is a point that we have to really stress. If anybody refuses or declines, it's because they're afraid. And the fear factor, it's not that they don't want to, it's that they're afraid of the authorities in the city, because they're living in a condition of a surveillance state. And, we really ought to mention the fact that Palestinian community of Jerusalem are largely living with the legal status of permanent residents, which is the status that Israel, agreed to give them in 1967 when it occupied the eastern side of the city. This is a status that is extremely precarious. It's the status you would normally give to foreigners arriving in your country, not to people that were indigenous or that lived there. It's a status that is revocable, and Israel has made it increasingly more precarious. In other words, it can be revoked on the flimsiest of pretexts, or for the reasons. For example, Palestinians who are living in Jerusalem and who have this permanent residency status, they are obliged by Israeli law to continually prove that the center of their life is in Israel. And that means that they have to present copious documentation, like an insane amount of documentation, their water bills, their children's school report cards, their this and that. Every time they interact with the Ministry of Interior for any request, they must prove that the center of their life is in Israel. And if they fail to prove that, or if the authorities think that they have failed to prove that, their status can be revoked, which means that they have literally no legal status because they become stateless. So Palestinians, who are living under this government or this country's rule in Jerusalem, they are very, very scared. And because anytime they could open their mouth and say the wrong thing, it could be held against them. And then they could show up at the ministry and be told your residency has been revoked. So it's not really correct for me to say that. I mean, people always want to talk to us, but they might, or they have been at times scared. They get scared to be photographed. They don't want to be visible. They don't want, because they're so afraid of the consequences. And therefore, one thing you might notice on our website is that we have this graphic, sort of a beige graphic of two heads, beautifully sketched and stuff. And that symbolizes or represents that story is being told anonymously. So, a lot of times the only condition under which people who live in Jerusalem with this status will agree to talk to us is anonymously. And I think that that's just really something important to understand, how much fear is prevalent, because the city is looking at erasing this community and they are terrified of being, kicked out. So I think that's just an important point to underscore.
And I'm thankful because you mentioned the question of a blue ID, which is essentially what you just described. This very unusual document and unique in a sense that gives Palestinians in Jerusalem residency, but not citizenship, and with all sorts of limitations. This is a topic I discussed with a number of guests, but I'm always happy to open and discuss, because I think in general there's very little knowledge about the exact condition of Jerusalemites, of Palestinian Jerusalemites in Jerusalem. The tendency is, particularly in America, is to think that, well, because they're in Jerusalem, they are Jerusalemites with the same rights as all of the others, but that's absolutely not true.
Exactly.
I wanted to ask you something about lexicon. Again, you have this section on the website, which I found very interesting. Jerusalem has its own lexicon. Can be religious, can be political. Obviously, there's certain words that defines Jerusalem, from the holy places to the Haram al-Sharif, the Western Wall, or, a church. But there are also loaded terms, like the word apartheid, which I noticed it's in the lexicon section. So I was wondering, what were the difficulties in building up this lexicon, and how you dealt with the problems that some of these words may create, or, given their definition?
Well, we do have a content team and we do things as a team, and this is something that we approached as a collaborative effort, and really respecting the people who live there, and also I mean, really trying to, first of all, let me just back up a second and say the reason we introduced the lexicon, and what it is basically, it's a glossary, and every time this term is used in an article, it's hyperlinked, so the reader can immediately click and see the definition. And the reason that we structured it like that was because this is, as we said, it's a very, very complex story, and it has a whole range of technical terms that are actually, specific to Jerusalem in a weird way, or they're specific to, this area. And without really understanding what those terms mean, you wouldn't really understand the story. So structurally, that's what the lexicon is. It's an interlinked set of terms that helps the reader. It also helps us because we don't have to be constantly redefining every time we tell the story. So we didn't want to be constantly saying it's this and this and this and this. One time definition, you get it in one place and then you link it. So that's the practical angle of it. As far as the difficulties, we have a team working on these terms. We really rely on our own expertise and definitions that are out there in the world. We try to be as rigorous and scholarly as possible in coming up with these definitions. And so it really hasn't been that hard. It's very clear. It's somehow clear when you're working on editing a story, which term might be confusing to somebody who has. We always try to write and thinking of the person that doesn't know anything. Like, I think that's a really important aspect of this, is don't write for the person that already knows, write for the person that is coming into this with nothing, right? So it's usually pretty clear which terms you get flagged for. This should be a glossary term. Sometimes we have debate over that even among our team, like, oh, this doesn't belong in the glossary, or it does, but we always resolve it very amicably because we're a very collaborative team. And then what I wanted to mention about the lexicon is that we actually have different types of reasons for putting a term into the lexicon. You know, in some cases, there are terms that have Arabic or English or even Hebrew, you know, kind of like equivalents. And people that normally hear it in one group might not understand the linguistic equivalent in another. So for example, like Damascus Gate is the English usage of the term for the main gate that goes into the new city, into the old city, the ancient, you know, gate. And then in Arabic, they call it Bab Lamud. So we tried in our glossary to just, you know, create clarity around those different namings of things. That's just one type of lexicon. The other one is, another one would be nuances of usage and interpretation that actually have political significance. And this is something, part of the reason we established the lexicon in the first place was to reflect these type of nuances. So for example, you know, there was this huge wall that was built in Jerusalem, right, by Israel. And Israelis call it very consciously and very deliberately, they call it the separation barrier. And that term connotes, you know, a barrier between us and the heathen hordes that are trying to attack us. It's a defensive barrier, therefore justified on a security basis. Palestinians find this to be very, very objectionable because they see the wall as being, you know, sort of designed to fragment them and, you know, separate them and create conditions of apartheid on them or whatever. So for them, that they would never use that term separation barrier because they don't accept that, you know, they are a threat. It's just very interesting, these language and terminology, even in you know, in everything about this is loaded. So when we define that term, we might, you know, include some of those nuances in the definition so that people understand, you know, the kind of the background to it. And then of course we have technical terms. There are plenty of technical terms in this arena that, you know, people just would have no idea, like area A, B, and C, which is a heritage of the Oslo Accords, and, you know, the area outside the city, which is still considered Jerusalem by Palestinians, was divided into areas A, B, and C, each of them having different types of rules governing who can operate there and so on and so forth. I don't want to get into all that detail, but it's or the term Kogat, for example, which is the acronym for the authority, the Israeli military authority that has been authorized by within the Ministry of Defense to rule over the occupied West Bank. So it's just like, and all of these terms are things that, you know, Palestinians in the city have to live with and swim with all the time. And, you know, that's just the way it is. But somebody from outside would have no clue and they wouldn't be able to understand it. So we really, that's why we created this lexicon, to give all these different types of background shadings and help readers to really understand what they're reading about.
And I really want to pick up on what you just said about, you know, people outside Jerusalem. Lexicon is about knowledge, so that you provide information about key terms. And stories, we may say, are about empathy, connect people. So I was wondering, what do you think people outside Jerusalem do not know about the city and they should know?
Yes, well, a lot. That's why we're doing our project. But I think what people outside Jerusalem should know is that it is not a city of peace, as it's, you know, known to be, or a holy city, or all of those kind of like very beautiful adjectives. It's actually a very dystopian city that's being remade in a forceful and violent way that excludes an entire people who's been rooted in this city for centuries. And all the policies derive from demographic imperatives. In fact, the Israeli municipality and the government are obsessed with demography and with maintaining a demographic ratio that can guarantee their control of the city in perpetuity. And, you know, it's really not an exaggeration, it's just reality. So the ratio, which was decided upon in 1973 by a government committee called the Gaffney Committee, is 26.5% Arab to 73.5% Jewish. And the entire ruling class is obsessed with this percentage and business, and everything, every policy in the city is derivative of it. So that is very dystopian. You know, think about urban planning based on, you know, maintaining a percentage, and the the mentality leads to policies that deliberately try to reduce the number or the percentage of one people in the city, despite whatever realities on the ground may be happening, like birth rate or immigration, emigration, whatever it is. It's just like this is what must be. So it leads to a situation such as what we saw even just this month, if you can believe it. The deputy mayor of Jerusalem posted on his own Facebook page an endorsement of a new initiative being started by a Jewish Zionist philanthropist outside the country to pay Arabs to leave the country. He literally was saying, we need to pay Arabs to leave the country. And of course, in the process, they were supposed to surrender their legal status so that they couldn't return. And he literally said, this is the deputy mayor of the city, right? As quoted in the Israeli newspaper Haaretz, he said, quote, if we'll manage to get 250,000 or 500,000 Arabic speakers out of the country, that will be enough. So tell me, can you imagine in any other city in the world, if those words were uttered by a deputy mayor, by the way, whose appointment was made with the blessing and full support of the actual mayor, what would be the reaction? So these are the type of realities that I think that people outside the city, do not understand or not aware of today.
This was a very interesting example, and one of which that it would happen in any other place in Europe or in America certainly would have drawn like a lot of attention. But you're right.
Exactly.
It doesn't outside Israel. And I just want to add a kind of like a follow-up question, because obviously Israel went to the ballot just a few weeks ago, and the results were kind of sad in a sense. I'm struggling to find a word.
Yeah.
What is interesting, but also very problematic for Jerusalem, is that now what these elections have set in motion is all of these right-wing groups, ultra-nationalist, religious ultra-nationalists, that now are claiming ownership of a city, in particular claiming ownership over holy places traditionally owned by Islamic organization, starting from the Haram al-Sharif, but that's not the only one. And I was wondering, from your own perspective, and with the knowledge that you have, and also with your team around the Jerusalem story, do you have a sense of where this might go?
Well, I don't like to share. I mean, in other words, it's not going to any place good. Let's just say that. It's very, very dangerous, and it's very concerning, and it's very much actively happening on the ground every day, every single day as we speak. This is happening. With respect to the holy places, there is a historic status quo that has been respected and preserved and for centuries. And now the goal of the power of the parties who have been elected is to transform that. And it's simply just going to cause, additional conflagration, violence, and I mean, I don't even want to speculate. It's just, it's not going anywhere good. That's all I'll say.
I share with you the same views. Let me go back to the stories, and I want to ask you something about the contents on the website. So, amongst the stories available at JerusalemStory.com, is there anyone or more that has somehow struck a chord with you and you want to share with us?
So now, are you asking me to play favorites? I mean, there's so many. I love every story. Obviously, it's everyone is special in its own way. I think that there are many, and it's hard to pick one or the other. I guess I would maybe point to topics, just in a hard choice among many that are really excellent candidates. I think we did some really excellent work on two topics that are not normally ever covered. And that one of those topics is the closure. Closure is this system that Israel introduced, that basically it's a closure on a whole people. It's very weird. It's a closure on any person carrying a PA ID, a Palestinian Authority ID, that lives outside the boundaries of Jerusalem. And it basically means that millions of Palestinians who live in the West Bank or Gaza or even outside cannot enter the city. They cannot enter Jerusalem freely. They have to have a permit from the military authorities. And I don't want to go into all the complexity of this topic. It's really fascinating to me, and amazing. In a way, it's just amazing that this closure has been in place since 1991 and nobody even remembers it anymore, or says boo about it. It's become so normal that it seems like the norm. But I remember a period where you could just drive from Ramallah to Jerusalem in 15 minutes or 20 minutes, and it was nothing. It was one big interlinked region that Jerusalem was the heart of all the Palestinian West Bank. Everybody would go there all the time for commerce, for religion, for medicine, for everything. So this closure is extremely artificial. But what's happened is, it's been in place since 1991. Of course, it's evolved. So 1991 was the beginning, and it was a sort of soft beginning. And then, it got more and more and more severe until there was actually building the wall in 2000. And now, literally, you have generations of Palestinians who may have been from Jerusalem. Their parents and family might be from Jerusalem. They might have every history in the city, but because they carry this particular ID, that the Palestinian Authority ID, they can no longer access their city at all without this permission. The permit and the entry permit, requires you to go to a military authority and apply. It takes weeks, and then it comes back, and you're given permission to enter some specific zone for some specific hour. Like you can go to a medical appointment for 3 hours, and if the medical appointment takes longer than that, you're out of luck. Sorry, you can be you just can't, you can be arrested, right? So I think the whole structure of closure and how it has demographically re-engineered the city in one fell swoop is a hugely important story. Generations of Palestinians are growing up who should be entitled to the heritage of this city, and it's for them, it's like a foreign country. They've never been there. They don't have any, it's very alien to them because they can't easily go there. So closure, the other aspect of closure that I would mention is that Israel has the capacity to blacklist people. 500,000 Palestinians with PAIDs are blacklisted in the system, which means they can never enter Jerusalem, sometimes for their entire life, like that. And literally, to be blacklisted takes nothing. Your neighbor could complain about you. You could have a traffic ticket. You could have whatever. It's just a check in the computer system. And once somebody makes it against you, you're out of luck. You can no longer go to Jerusalem. And I'm not kidding you that 500,000 Palestinians, at minimum, this is maybe an underestimate, are blacklisted today. And that might be a status that they would have to live with for 99 years, for their whole life. So these are draconian systems that are extreme. And I really think the topic of closure is one that we did extremely good work on. And I would encourage everybody to learn more about it. The other topic that I think that we uniquely dove into in a way that's very important is the West Side Story. What does the West Side Story mean? So Jerusalem is divided between West and East. I mean, I said it's complicated, and here we go. So West Jerusalem was the part of Jerusalem that Israel conquered and declared as its part of its state in 1948, and then 19 years later, in 1967, they conquered and occupied the rest of the city, which is the East Jerusalem. Now, everybody focuses on, the story of East Jerusalem since 1967 as being the problematic one, as if what happened in 48 was just, nothing, or was just sort of normal, or was just part of, it's just normally part of Israel, and that's how it's always been, and that's, there's no questions asked. But actually, the reality, as we've documented very, well on our website, with stories and stories and stories, and a lot of research, is that the conquest of West Jerusalem in 1948 was extremely violent. It involved a full ethnic cleansing. 73,000 Palestinians were either driven out or, expelled, or chose to leave for temporary safety, but they were never allowed to come back, because Israel put in place immediately laws that, stripped them of their citizenship, banned them from coming back, and expropriated all their properties, including all their financial assets. So this is a very, 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 major story that I think kind of got lost in the shuffle with all the focus on East Jerusalem since 67. So I would say, it's not a choice. It's just I'm spotlighting these two topics as being something that I think where we did some really important original work. And I encourage everybody to explore those topics, but all topics on the website, not only those.
I shouldn't have asked about your favorite, but I must say that I was going to ask you about the West Side Story. And I, pleased that you talked about it. Perhaps I can make a suggestion. There's one category that is missing in the website, and it's the Cats of Jerusalem.
The which?
the cats of Jerusalem.
The cats of Jerusalem.
Their own
yes.
story.
That's true. That's true. There are so many cats in Jerusalem. That's true.
Let me ask a question. How do you see the future of JerusalemStory.com?
So the situation on the ground in Jerusalem is very dire. It's very dire, and we must meet the moment and continue to bear witness and document it. The stories are literally endless. So we hope to grow this effort, both in the scope of what we cover, but also in the audiences that we reach and the impact that we have. We also hope to add other types of content in the future. We're working on, original videos, and we hope to add a podcast such as this one. And we just hope to also, there is something that we've built into the website, which would help us to create almost like a research library with all kinds of articles about this community and its story. These are all future endeavors that we hope to, nurture and bring to fruition as we continue our very, very, what I think is very, very important work.
I have one more question. Is there anything that we didn't discuss about Jerusalem Story that you want to talk about?
I think we covered a lot of ground. Of course, there's always more to cover, but I would say that I think for now we did a pretty good job of covering a lot of the key points. So I'm very grateful to you for having me today.
This was Kate Rouhana, founding director of Jerusalem Story. Jerusalem Story can be found at JerusalemStory.com, and I will post the link on the website. Kate, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to support the podcast, please share it with others on social media or leave a rating and review. To catch all the latest, follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at Jerusalem Unplugged. Thanks, and I'll see you next time.